And he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal. He desires to be annihilated so that he never has to experience an eternity of loss. They were inspired by Carl Jung's Psychology and Alchemy.
Contaminated? Not quite. More like evolved.
Albedo is an absolute lunatic and an easy top 5 video game villain of all time for me. Struggling with the consequences of immortality and the insanity from having interacted with a being from a higher plane of existence, Albedo is a ton of fun whenever he's on screen. So without wasting any more time, let's get right into the video.
Udu.
Albedo was born as part of the URTV project, standing for Udu Retrovirus. So before we look at Albedo, we should take a moment and try to understand Udu. Emphasis on try because, fair warning, this section is going to get weird. And as a forewarning, some official information contradicts other official information. For example, the datalog entry in Episode III says Udu's existence was known about since the times of Lost Jerusalem, while the Perfect Guide says it was only known about in the last 300 years. So bear with me if what I say doesn't line up perfectly with your understanding. None of the contradictions should affect things in a major way. The universe of Xenosaga is largely based on our own with a couple extra features, such as being split into the upper and lower domains, that with only one known exception are unable to interact with each other. The mechanisms of the upper domain are never explored, and very little information about it is ever given, apart from Udu being its sole known inhabitant. The lower domain can be further split into the real number domain and the imaginary number domain. The real number domain comprises all of the physical objects of the lower domain, and is similar to how we would perceive the universe. And the imaginary number domain houses the souls, or consciousnesses, of those in the real number domain. The real and imaginary number domains are two sides of the same coin, as, with few exceptions, for something to exist in one, it must also have a counterpart in the other, and a death in one leads to a death in the other. One other feature of the imaginary number domain is the collective unconscious, which is generally where a person's soul will go after they die. Humanity would discover something they would name the Unus Mundus Network, or UMN for short, which would allow them to interact with the imaginary number domain. Discovered in the era of Lost Jerusalem thousands of years before the games, the UMN interacts with the collective unconscious, kind of treating it like a soup, utilizing the fact that the imaginary number domain lacks physical properties like distance, allowing instantaneous transportation of both information and physical objects. Initially, the UMN was only used to transport information. However, about 300 years before Episode I, humans experimented with gate jumps to send people through the imaginary domain, which was when Udu was first discovered. Udu is... yeah, that's the entire sentence. Named for the network that led to its discovery, Unus Mundus Drive Operation, or Udu for short, has a nature that is very complicated to perceive as it resides within the upper domain. Thankfully, the exact nature of Udu doesn't exactly make a huge difference to the story, so for all intents and purposes, I'm just going to treat Udu as a completely foreign object whose existence is incomprehensible to my understanding. The one description we do have of Udu is that it is a wave-type existence belonging to the upper domain, which isn't exactly helpful, so I'm just gonna move on from that. Using something called the Zohar, Udu was able to transcend domains and observe the lower domain, being the only entity from the upper domain to do so. Upon discovering the lower domain, Udu became curious and observed the domain and its inhabitants via its terminals. Abel in the real number domain.
If you have seen the pilot of Omega Res Novae, please contact security immediately.
And Abel's arc in the imaginary number domain. Through its observations, it came to conclude that the universe was doomed to collapse, and sought to discover the cause behind it. Due to the lack of physical properties in the imaginary number domain, the majority of its observing was done in there through Abel's arc. Its eventual conclusion was that the death of the universe was going to be caused by human spirits rejecting the collective unconscious. Udu tried to warn humanity of the universe's eventual destruction and would reach out to those who entered too deep into the UMN, such as the humans who were being used to test gate jumps on people. However, its message would be misinterpreted, and those who made contact with Udu developed an intense fear of it, thinking it to be responsible for the visions of a dying universe that they were shown. Enter Dr. Dmitry Yuriev. He was one of the people used during these initial human gate jump experiments, and was the first known person to make contact with Udu. As we just mentioned, Dmitry wouldn't understand Udu's message, and had an intense feeling of dread instilled in him. He tried to run from this fear initially, but eventually concluded that fear was what shackled humans to the human realm, and one could overcome fear by transcending to the realm of Udu and obtaining the power of a god. But we're getting sidetracked a bit here. This is supposed to be a video on Albedo, after all.
URTV, a failed product of a twisted age.
Dmitry sought to study Udu, and so he began the Yuriev Institute, a research organization dedicated to Udu. He developed organic weapons known as Udu retroviruses, or URTVs, to be his primary method of studying Udu. The Perfect Guide contradicts itself a little with regards to Dmitry's intentions at this point, as it states both that the URTVs were made for the purpose of mutual annihilation with Udu, but then a few paragraphs later says that Dmitry never had any intention of eliminating Udu. The game doesn't clarify this either, so I'm just going to assume destroying Udu was a guise that was easier for him to work with. Regardless, there were 669 URTVs created, with units 1 through 665 being the standard units, lacking a sense of self and identity, and the remaining 4 being the variant units, carefully crafted with their own goals. Unit 666 was named Rebirth, the Red Dragon, who will eventually be known as Junior, and was designated to be the leader of the URTVs. We'll come back in a moment for Unit 667. Unit 668 was the only female variant, named Citrine, tasked with stopping the Red Dragon should he get out of control. Unit 669 was named Negrito, who was created with 2 purposes. Alongside Citrine, he was tasked with keeping the Red Dragon in check, and also had a more secret task of serving as a host for Yuriev's mind once his body degraded. Back to Unit 667, we arrive at our main focus for today. Named Albedo after his white hair, he was born as a conjoined twin alongside Rebirth. However, they would be separated after 28 weeks. The 2 of them would develop special powers related to cell growth. Rebirth the ability to completely halt it, and Albedo the exact opposite, the ability to rapidly accelerate it. With this power, Albedo was effectively immortal, as he could regenerate from any injury that he sustained, including losing his own head.
Let's not lose our heads, though!
Albedo assumed that everyone had this capability and was shocked to learn that he was the only one, and disheartened by the knowledge that one day he would be separated from Rebirth. The 2 of them were incredibly close as a result of their time spent conjoined together. However, 2 obstacles would arise to strain their relationship. The first was when Dmitry brought in a girl named Sakura Mizrahi. Sakura was born with a brain defect and was unable to speak or communicate in the real world, but had a hypersensitivity towards the synchronicity of the UMN, and so Yuriev thought that she could be useful as anti-Udu practice for the URTVs. But Rebirth and Sakura developed feelings for each other, angering Albedo as he felt that she was stealing his brother away from him, and he started to hate her. The second was during the Miltian conflict when the URTVs were dispatched to destroy the Song of Nephilim. While channeling the anti-Udu waves, Rebirth sees a vision of Miltia being torn apart and shuts down the spiritual link. He realizes that if he continues, the amount of thermal energy that would be produced would destroy the planet. Rubido lets go of Albedo's hand, allowing Udo to break free and make contact with most of the present URTVs, including Albedo, contaminating him and beginning his full-on spiral into madness. Albedo felt incredibly betrayed by Rubido, that his brother had abandoned him to the whims of Udo. In the Japanese-only Xenosaga 1 and 2, the Kirschwassers find Albedo on Old Milsha and bring his unconscious body back to the Song of Nephilim. I'm not exactly clear on what Albedo goes through between here and Episode 1, but by the start of the first game, he is working with Ormus, a religion secretly behind the majority of the events in Xenosaga. Albedo makes a couple of mysterious appearances in Episode 1 before being introduced properly. And for simplicity's sake, I'm going to only be counting the game's canon here and not the anime's, as it changes up a few things. Albeit not hugely related to Albedo, though he does get a couple extra appearances. Albedo's first appearance in the games is on Pleroma, after Ziggy and Momo escape from Margulis, where Margulis scorns Albedo for being late and letting them get away. Next, he's seen laughing at Margulis' failed attempts at recovering Momo, before leaving in ES Simeon to do it himself. For the next while, he begins tailing the Durandal in Simeon, and around halfway through the game we see him check in with Margulis again. They discuss Ormus's plans, and Margulis mentions that using the Song of Nephilim may be necessary should things go awry, much to Albedo's surprise.
Unless, of course, war were declared.
Things go awry, and Albedo calls upon the Song of Nephilim.
What's that?
War were declared.
After calling the Song of Nephilim, he heads to the Durandal in the middle of a Gnosis attack, killing whoever he feels like on the way, Gnosis or not. On the Durandal, he tracks Momo down, abducts her, and brings her back to the Song of Nephilim with him, in order to extract something called the Y data from her mind. The Y data contained the location of the abyss surrounding Old Milsha, which Albedo's new employers, Ormus, had tasked him with retrieving. Momo awakens on the song next to a dying Kirschwasser, who exchanges memories with her, and we see a vision of Albedo beating this Kirschwasser. Momo explores her new environment and eventually comes across the throne room. She retches at the sight of all the dead Kirschwassers lying around and is then noticed by Albedo. He notes Momo's sadness, but asks her whether she's actually worthy of feeling sadness as a Realian.
The act of mourning the dead belongs to the realm of humans.
He berates her lack of humanity for a while, and then ends his tirade by psychologically torturing her, ripping off his arm and head right in front of her and laughing maniacally. I'll cover this scene in greater depth later, but for now let's move on. Once Shion's party discovers the Song of Nephilim, Albedo notes that they tracked Momo down faster than he expected, and begins to extract the Y data from her. As they approach the song, Junior and Negrito, who now goes by Guinan, both sense Albedo's presence, and Junior recognizes the Song of Nephilim from 14 years ago. They search the song and eventually find Albedo, still tormenting Momo and extracting the Y data from her. Junior shoots at him, but he just regenerates whatever wounds Junior inflicts. Albedo claims that he doesn't view himself as contaminated by Udo, but rather Udo helped him evolve into a higher form of being. Albedo finishes extracting what he can of the Y data and peers into the information Mizrahi had hid away inside Momo, before being blasted back to reality by Junior. He then gets in ES Simeon and attacks the party. Afterwards, he expresses disappointment in Junior's reluctance to utilize his full power and attempts to taunt him into going all out. Momo wakes up and interrupts the two of them, diffusing the situation a bit, before Blue Testament, or Virgil, shows up with a message from Wilhelm, the true head of Ormus.
Stop screwing around. Hurry up and get the job done. Don't waste your time on these fools.
Albedo reluctantly agrees, but passes on his own message to Virgil.
Give him this message. It belongs to me.
Likely referring to the Y data. As he flies off, he peers into the Y data once again, laughing at all the protections put into place by Joachim Mizrahi. After Shion's party exits the Song of Nephilim, Albedo gives them a call on the Durandal. He taunts Junior before summoning another one of Mizrahi's inventions, the Proto-Merkaba, and inserts the Song of Nephilim into his new toy. He threatens to annihilate Second Milsha with his new superweapon and taunts Junior to come and stop him. Junior, of course, comes to try and stop him. Albedo waits at the core of Proto-Merkaba and wastes no time in attacking the party once they get there. After the fight, Albedo reveals to Junior why he became the way he is. He felt betrayed 14 years ago on Old Milsha and wants Junior to remember and repent for his sins. He then reveals his newest creation, Sophie Pathos, which is the result of him fusing a Gnosis with the reactor to Proto-Merkaba. He once again takes his exit, telling Junior that he's sure they'll meet again, assuming he survives, that is. As they defeat Sophie Pathos, Albedo watches from ES Simeon as Proto-Merkaba slowly makes its way towards Second Milsha, wondering if they were capable enough to stop it. In the mid-credits scenes, Albedo doesn't seem bothered by his plans seemingly failing, instead commenting on how entertaining the spectacle was, and that all that needs to happen now is for Momo to link up with the UMN and laughs like a maniac once again. Red Testament is then seen talking to Wilhelm about Albedo, concerned about the potential for him to link up with Udu again. Wilhelm is undisturbed, not believing Albedo has the strength to do so, and that the Testament's role for the time being is to ensure that he stays in line. His first appearance in Episode II is when Guinan attempts to telepathically link with him to do a little information gathering. Guinan offers some peace talks which fall on Albedo's deaf ears, and then Albedo confirms Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder as canon characters in the Xenosaga universe. Albedo tells Guinan that he knows his true purpose, and lets him know that he'll be borrowing Rubido, before cutting off the telepathic link. Next up is when Momo is set to undergo maintenance at UMN headquarters by her mother, Yuli Mizrahi. While she was captive at the Song of Nephilim, Albedo had placed a trap in her mind. This trap activated when Momo was linked up to the UMN and began feeding the rest of the Y data that was previously locked away to him. Momo attempts to erase her mind to stop Albedo from gaining access to the rest of the Y data, causing Shion and the others to dive into her mind to try and chase Albedo off and save her. However, Albedo expected them to make this Encephalon dive, and so a second trap was set for them.
Can you still feel the beating in your chest, Rubido? Can you still feel my heart buried in the right side?
He figured that Junior would take the bait, and waited for him to snap upon seeing certain memories of Sakura, baiting him into a battle. He expected that Momo would try and stop the fighting within her mind, and surrender the remainder of the Y data to him peacefully. With the complete Y data now available to him, Albedo now had the key to the Abyss, and was able to locate Milsha for Ormus, and he dissipates alongside ES Simeon. Albedo vanishes from the story for a while, and is next mentioned by Dr. Yuriev after taking over Guinan's body during a call to Junior. He feels that Albedo is going to attempt to recontact Udu and tries to convince Junior to kill Albedo. Despite everything that's happened, Junior still cares for Albedo and refuses to kill his brother, instead pledging to use more peaceful means. Near the end of the game, as the party confronts the Patriarch of Ormus, Sergius XVII, Albedo rematerializes to assist them. He's displeased with Sergius trying to abuse the power of the Zohar, as Albedo wants to claim it for himself, so he temporarily allies with us to stop him.
How about it, Rubido? Want me to give you a hand squashing this guy?
Sergius lectures him about how a lower life form such as a URTV could never understand his ideals, and Albedo attacks him. Sergius, with the power of Proto-Omega and the Zohar, is able to beat him back, disintegrating him and killing his body in the real number domain. Albedo laughs, claiming that even reducing him to particles wouldn't destroy him, and requests Junior to breathe in the particles that used to be him. The party then attacks Sergius, and after the fight, the Testaments arrive. Wilhelm, the true head of Ormus, had determined that Sergius had outlived his usefulness. The Testaments destroy the Patriarch and restore Albedo's body. Back in his own body, Albedo merges with Udu again, and creates a space-time anomaly that consumes the Omega system. He challenges Junior to come to his world for them to have some fun.
Behold, Rubido! At long last my time has come! The time to join the eternal chain! The time to quench my thirst at the source!
Junior takes Albedo's challenge and makes the journey to the space-time anomaly on his own. On his way to Albedo, Junior is shown some manipulated memories to taunt him into actually trying to kill Albedo, as that's what Albedo desired. Eventually, Junior finds Albedo and...
Oh no, he's hot!
Junior, still not wanting to kill his brother, tries to talk him down, but Albedo had already made up his mind. Albedo threatens to shift the anomaly into the upper domain with Udu and bring all of mankind with him, where he would be worshipped as the harbinger of a new world. This finally succeeds, as Junior is finally convinced to activate his Red Dragon mode, and he attacks Albedo. Albedo spends the fight taunting Junior,
What can a traitor like you do?
and refuses to win, healing Junior when his HP gets low. Eventually, after suffering enough damage, he casts Eternal Chain, ending the fight. The two of them reflect on the fun they had fighting, and then Albedo starts to die.
Oblivion, huh? You might say this is a release. At least, I won't have to fear losing anyone anymore.
Albedo?
Rather than being angry or panicked, Albedo awaits the sweet release of death, as he knows that he'll never have to live on without Rubido, and allows Oblivion to claim him. In his last words before being carried away by some angelic Kirschwassers, he warns Junior about Negredo's shadow, as there's a reason it's unaffected by Udu. Albedo wouldn't get to enjoy Oblivion for long, though, as in the post-credits scene, Wilhelm is seen conversing with the three Testaments, Voyager, Virgil, and Kevin, when he reveals a new fourth Testament, the White Testament, Albedo.
Welcome, Weaver of the Eternal Circle of Zarathustra.
On the surface, Albedo seemed to be satisfied, but deep down he still wished to reunite with Junior, and Wilhelm offered him a second chance to achieve this, by allowing him to be reborn as a testament. In exchange, Wilhelm saw Albedo's path as one that would benefit his own goals, working towards the eternal recurrence. Throughout Episode 3, Albedo only actually makes 3 appearances. The first is alongside the other Testaments in the opening cutscene at Rennes-le-Château, as they stand around Mary Magdalene's grave, although Albedo doesn't actually say anything here. His second appearance is also in Rennes-le-Château, after the party defeats Virgil. He takes the Vessel of Anima out of Virgil's ES, and despite Junior recognizing Albedo's voice, Albedo makes no notice of his brother and leaves shortly after. His third and final appearance is his most substantial. He appears after the party fights Dmitry Yuriev and Omega Res Novae, where he was sent by Kevin and Wilhelm to recover Abel and the Zohar. He lectures Dmitry about how he was being seduced by power as he once was. He extracts both Abel and the Zohar out of Omega and calls out to Guinan's body, hoping that the real Guinan would be able to hear him. Dmitry responds, but Albedo isn't talking to him and disregards anything he has to say. Albedo's message was heard by Guinan, who manages to wrest control of his body back from Dmitry and asks Junior to kill him. Much like with Albedo, Junior doesn't want to do it at first. Albedo tells him to stop being so soft, as he won't save anyone that way, and threatens to do it himself. Junior refuses to let Albedo do it, and is convinced to form a link to purge Udu's contamination and destroy Yuriev. Albedo intended to have Guinan's consciousness transfer over to Junior's body, while he sacrificed himself in the process of destroying Yuriev. Guinan, however, had other plans. Living a life without trying to stop Junior would be denying his own existence, so Guinan takes over Albedo's body, forcing Albedo's consciousness to cohabit Junior's body while he sacrifices himself to destroy Yuriev.
He put on a one-man show and ran off by himself. You pissed me off to the very end, Negredo.
Albedo.
Having finally achieved his goal of uniting with Junior once more, Albedo is finally able to rest. He and Junior share some words about Citrine and Guinan, and promise to all play together once more when they all get the chance. And then, before he goes to rest, Albedo lets Junior know where he sent Abel and the Zohar. Albedo doesn't appear again in the game, but he is mentioned one more time in the epilogue, when Momo asks Junior if he could say hello to Albedo for her.
I'll pass him the message when he wakes up. But he's pretty lazy, so I don't know when that'll be.
Given how intertwined Albedo's fate is with Udu, let's quickly revisit Udu's character before diving into an analysis on Albedo. Udu is incomprehensible to both us and to most characters in the Xenosaga universe. Dmitry and Albedo both consider it to be equivalent to God and see Udu in the upper domain as a way to ascend from the shackles of humanity. Wilhelm seems to have at least a slightly better idea of what Udu is capable of, as he needs to gather Abel and Abel's arc prior to activating Zarathustra so that he can cover the eyes and ears of God from what he's doing, indicating that he's aware of Udu existing outside of the eternal recurrence. In my video on Smithy from Super Mario RPG, I mentioned the concept of the orthogonality thesis, and I think applying it to Udu here helps us to best understand it, or at least the consequences of it. The thesis asserts that there can exist arbitrarily intelligent agents pursuing any kind of goal. Surrendering to the fact that Udu's existence, methods, and motives aren't always going to make sense, nor are even necessary for the story of Albedo, helps us to focus on the details that actually are important. We can't see exactly what Albedo or Yuriev saw once Udu contacted them, but it's clear that Udu's attempts to warn of the end of the universe were insufficient and drove anyone it came into contact with mad, with the exception of Shion. And interestingly, both of the characters we meet who were contaminated by Udu develop coping mechanisms that involve some form of ascension into godhood.
Now I will transcend the fear of God. I will surpass God's existence. I will obtain Zarathustra that sleeps on Mictum, and ascend to a higher plane, through the realm of God.
Contaminated? Not quite. More like evolved.
By the events of Episode 1, Albedo had deluded himself into believing that his contact with Udu was some sort of awakening for him, that it had removed the locks on his power, allowing him to ascend beyond the incomplete mortality of everyone else. While everyone else was afraid of the unknown factor of Udu, Albedo was enlightened.
When I temporarily linked with Udu, I climbed the ladder of evolution and saw the leaning tower of culture that humans have struggled to construct.
No longer bound by fear, he was free to act as he pleased, for to him, Udu was no monster, but his god. And by the end of Episode 2, Albedo had fully embraced Udu. After having his body restored by the Testaments, Albedo unites with Udu, knowing that one way or another he'd get what he wanted. Either he triggered Junior's instincts, forcing him to kill Albedo, or he ascended to the realm of Udu where he would be worshipped. Next, let's take a look at Albedo prior to Udu's influence. He seems to be a bit of a crybaby during his younger years. He worries about Udu's power and is concerned about Rubido's slacking when it comes to training. This is in part because Rubido was his anchor with regards to Udu. If Rubido was confident in the face of Udu, then Albedo could be confident as well. The reason it was Rubido that Albedo latched onto was in large part due to their time spent conjoined together, allowing them to share an incredibly unique bond. As a result, Albedo was incredibly protective over his twin, lashing out at anyone who threatened Rubido's authority or who would take Rubido away from him. And this is a perfect transition into perhaps the one that Albedo hates the most, Sakura Mizrahi. Throughout episodes 1 and 2, Albedo has this weird obsession with Momo and the Kirschwassers that seemingly goes beyond his stated goal of obtaining the Y data from Momo, but where does that come from? In episode 1, we don't really get a clear answer, but episode 2 gives us the reason. Sakura. The 99 series Realians, or Kirschwassers, as well as Momo and the rest of the 100 series Realians, were all created by Joachim Mizrahi to resemble his late daughter, Sakura. And Albedo's hatred of Sakura ran so deep that it extended to anything to do with her. In Albedo's mind, Sakura was merely some harlot who swooped in to steal from him the one who mattered the most, Rubido.
I hated this girl. She was always flirting with you. I'm glad she's dead. I am.
Albedo was so insecure about the thought of losing Rubido that he couldn't stand to see him be happy with anyone else, and lashes out at anyone who Rubido paid any attention to outside of their trio of brothers. Yuriev brought in Sakura as he thought she would be valuable training for the URTVs in dealing with Udu, but in the end she was simply another seed that would begin to sow Albedo's descent.
Those girls were toys for your enjoyment. They were all individuals with wills of their own, yet you...
In the Song of Nephilim, Albedo is surrounded by dead or dying Kirschwassers, all by his hand. And with Momo held captive, he doesn't simply extract the Y data from her and be done with it. He torments her, subjects her to his twisted mind, forces her to witness him horrifyingly dismember himself. Sakura died, but Albedo's hatred did not, and so the Realians created from her existence were the new subjects for his insanity. And a large reason that Albedo was so possessive of Rubido and hateful of Sakura was because of his own immortality. Immortality is a really weird concept to think about, as forever is impossibly large to even comprehend.
Eternity, my friend, is the long fucking time.
And frequently enough, immortality is being sought after as a blessing, rather than a curse to escape from. Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z wishes to collect the Dragon Balls so that he can ask Shenron to grant him immortality. One of the world's oldest surviving pieces of literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh, is all about a search for immortality. The Fountain of Youth, Philosopher's Stone, Elixir of Life, or the Holy Grail are famous mythological concepts sought after throughout history as sources of eternal youth and keys to living forever. But immortality does come with its consequences.
Is that what this is about? All he's gotta do is just regenerate. What's the problem?
Especially when you're the only one. Albedo initially believed that everyone had the same powers as him, and learning that this wasn't the case was immensely traumatic for him, as it meant that he could foresee a day where he would have to live on without Rebirth.
Only me? You're both gonna die and leave me behind? No! I don't want to be alone! If you die, I want to die too!
And so he coped. Poorly. He lashes out at Sakura as if Rebirth was spending time with her, he wasn't spending time with him. He mangles himself in horrific ways in an effort to feel something, but his body simply regenerates. He desires to be annihilated so that he never has to experience an eternity of loss, but because of his powers, the only one capable of delivering him this fate is Rebirth, who refuses to do so. Not even Sergius, with the power of Proto-Omega and the Zohar, is capable of delivering Albedo a true death. This desire for self-annihilation was Albedo's main driving force for the first 2 games, culminating in him linking with Udo to force Junior to activate Red Dragon mode and destroy him for good. Or it would have been for good, except Albedo wasn't fully satisfied yet. Deep down, he still wished to reunite with Rebirth, and Wilhelm offered him a second chance. Wilhelm saw Albedo as a potential tool to aid in activating Zarathustra and causing the eternal recurrence, and so he was offered a new life as a testament. Albedo took this offer as he still had things he wished to accomplish. Well, thing, singular. And thus he was able to properly make peace with Junior and unite their souls into one body once again. Xenosaga is absolutely full of symbolism and references to our real world. From Christianity to Judaism, Gnosticism, Nietzsche, Jung, Paul McCartney, and I'm sure lots more. We'd be here absolutely forever if I did a deep dive into everything. Thankfully for me though, this video is focused on Albedo, so that helps to narrow it down. At least a bit. Starting with his name and the names of the rest of the URTV variants, they were inspired by Carl Jung's Psychology and Alchemy, which in turn drew these terms from the magnum opus of alchemy, or the process to create the Philosopher's Stone. The first step was known as Nigrido, or the blackening, followed by Albedo, the whitening, Citrinatus, the yellowing, and finally Rebirth, the reddening. The 3 male variants directly take their names from these steps, while Citrine's name is a shortened version of Citrinatus, with their names coming from the step represented by their hair colors. In psychology, at least according to Carl Jung, Albedo is the second step of individuation, the process by which individual beings are formed and differentiated. This phase consists of the purification of the blackness found in the first stage, Nigrido, cleansing the palette, or the psyche, to allow for the future steps to paint it with a new self. This stage is where a lot of self-reflection occurs as you look deep into your mind to try and discover your true beliefs, values, and desires. And if we look at Albedo's character arc, we can see some of these elements pop up here and there. A rather literal interpretation of the cleansing of the blackness could be his relationship with Guinan throughout the games. Episode 2 shows him confront Nigrido about his true purpose as the executioner, and in Episode 3 he's the one convincing Junior to destroy Nigrido's body in order to permanently remove Dr. Yuriev from the world. His death and reincarnation at the end of Episode 2 could represent this cleansing in another fashion. Being destroyed by Junior and reborn as a testament cleansed the blackness within Albedo's soul, allowing him to have a fresh start where he was able to show he cared in less destructive ways. Gone is his desire for annihilation, both self and of the universe, and he can now fill this void with red, or Rebirth. For now, rather than wishing to be destroyed by his brother, he wished to reunite with Rebirth. Instead of scorning his brothers, he reminisces about the good times they had. and instead of sowing chaos, not that one, he offers aid to Junior and the rest in their goal of shutting down Ormus's plans. Albedo ends up as part of two different groups that could be considered analogous to the Horsemen of the Apocalypse. The URTVs, who get a literal comparison to the Horsemen in Episode II, and the Testaments. And in both cases, he takes on the role of the White Rider, Conquest. Revelation 6, verses 1 and 2. I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come!" I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. One interpretation of Conquest's identity is that of the Antichrist, and this one I believe to be the most fitting for Albedo. 1 John 2:22. Who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and the Son.
Perhaps I'll cause a shift and shove this whole dimension into a high-order domain. Don't be afraid. We low-dimension creatures will move en masse to a higher plane. It'll be glorious. The true eternal chain. The fulfillment of that which we lacked. The evolution of mankind, and the evolution of the very world itself that watches over us!
The way Albedo talks to Junior at the end of Episode 2 demonstrates what he views Udu as. He threatens to bring humanity to salvation by dragging them into the upper domain where they'll experience something analogous to heaven, and worship Albedo as the Messiah who brought them there.
They'll name a holiday after me!
Matthew 24:24. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and produce great signs and omens, to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Albedo substitutes himself in for the role of Jesus here, who, let me remind you, is an actual canon character in Xenosaga, claiming to be the prophet with the power to lead humanity to paradise. By treating himself as the Messiah, he's denying that Jesus is the Christ. And by deifying Udu, he's denying God. Looking at that passage from 1 John, we see that denying the Father and the Son is a sign of the Antichrist. And looking at Matthew, Jesus warns of false prophets with great signs or omens, bringing humanity to the upper domain, for instance, with promises so great to potentially lead even the most devoted astray, claiming that he'll get his own holiday, or literally, holy day. Now, whether Albedo actually means anything he says is certainly debatable, as his primary goal is to coax Junior into killing him. But if there was any amount of truth to his words, they certainly fit the bill of the Antichrist interpretation of the White Rider.
Except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone.
Albedo quotes John 12:24 when talking to Momo in the Song of Nephilim. In the biblical context, the verse foreshadows Jesus' own death and rebirth. The kernel of wheat is fairly useless on its own, but its death of falling to the ground and being buried allows it to become more than only a seed, and grow into something much greater. The seed sacrifices itself to allow a full plant to blossom that has much more to offer than a measly seed could. The obvious analogy here is with Albedo ripping off his own body parts and regenerating them, as that's what he does in the same scene that he says this. While not necessarily being reborn as something stronger, he's still able to regenerate from what one would expect to be a death, and his former body parts were just sacrifices to wear down the enemy. It could also be Albedo foreshadowing his own death at the hands of Junior and subsequent rebirth as a testament. As a URTV, Albedo was offering little to the universe and was instead actively hostile towards it. But after his rebirth as a testament, he helped Junior to save it. He destroys Dr. Yuriev and guides Junior to where Wilhelm had him send Abel and the Zohar. John 12:24 and 25. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. but if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. He that loveth his life shall lose it, and he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal. It's also interesting to look at the verse immediately after Albedo's quote, which could be a nod towards Albedo's self-destructive views towards life. In the biblical context, he who loveth his life shall lose it refers to prioritizing oneself over a devotion to God, and how a focus on personal desires will cost your soul in the afterlife. He that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal uses a different definition of the word hate than what we might be used to. Hate in this context simply means love less. To love yourself less than your spiritual growth and devotion to God, your soul will be rewarded with eternal life in heaven. Given how Albedo views his immortality as a curse, a more literal interpretation of the following verse could also be a reasonable justification for including this quote. As we've gone over, Albedo hated his immortality, as it meant that he would have to live on after Rubido died, which leads for him wishing for Rubido to kill him. The way it's phrased in the Bible implies that hating life is the cause and keeping your life forever is the consequence, while in Albedo's case the opposite seems to be true. He seemed more or less fine until learning that he was the only immortal one, and then learning that he'd have to live through seeing everybody around him die, he started to hate life and sought after a release.
If you die, I want to die too!
I am the Alpha and the Omega of perfect consciousness!
Not too long after, when Shion's party arrives at the Song of Nephilim to rescue Momo, Albedo quotes another Bible verse. This time, Revelation 22:13. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Also seen in the introduction to Xenogears, this verse references the omnipotence and eternity of God. In Christianity, God was the first being in existence, and his presence will continue long after we're all dead and gone. Albedo quoting it here is a bit of an ego trip, effectively comparing himself to God. Just before saying this, he mentions how he's reached a higher stage of existence compared to incomplete mortals, as if he's ascended to what he views as a god and considers himself to be all-powerful.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, show me, define me.
This line is a reference to the Brothers Grimm fairy tale, Snow White. Every morning, the evil queen would ask her magic mirror who the fairest in the lands was. The mirror could not lie, and every morning, well, at least until the events of the story, it would respond saying that she was. We've gone over Albedo's inflated ego, and comparisons to God or a godlike being enough already, so I don't think I need to delve too much further into this.
Frailty, thy name is woman.
This quote comes from Hamlet, and in its original context is said by Hamlet about his mother when she marries her late brother's husband so soon after his death. He views his mother as weak, or perhaps desperate with how quickly she remarried, and so he takes her insecurities and projects them onto all women. When Albedo says it, he's referring more to humankind in general, and their frailty in his mind is their endless attempts at distracting themselves from the inevitability of mortality.
Culture, civilization, all delusions created by a powerless race.
He corrects himself shortly after, however, as he's talking to Momo, and he doesn't view Realians as people, and therefore statements about the nature of humanity shouldn't apply to them, which is actually a recurring theme throughout the game. This leads us nicely into Nietzsche and how his works appear as the subtitles for the games. Der Wille zur Macht, or the will to power, is an important concept within Nietzsche's philosophy that, funnily enough, he never fully clarified in his own works despite how important it seems to be. My German pronunciation is going to be absolutely awful, so to spare us all, I'm going to be sticking with the English translations of everything in this section. And also, as a quick aside, the book that the subtitle for Episode II came from, Beyond Good and Evil, is the source of his famous quote about the abyss staring back, which I've quoted in a couple different videos on the channel thus far. The will to power is a bit difficult to explain as I mentioned, Nietzsche himself never clearly defined it. However, attempts have certainly been made. Wikipedia describes it as the concept of actualizing one's will onto one's self or one's surroundings, which is a bit vague to me. My best understanding of it comes from Bernard Regenster's interpretation from his book, The Affirmation of Life, Nietzsche on Overcoming Nihilism. In my view, then, the will to power is the will to the overcoming of resistance. Nietzsche presents the will to power as the basis for life, a rule that every living being has to follow. He took inspiration from Schopenhauer's Will to Life, which says that the desire to live is the main driving force behind any living being's actions. Nietzsche takes it a step further by asserting that we don't only have a desire for life, but a desire for power, and it was this desire for power which was our driving force. One of the larger talking points about the will to power is whether it is specifically a human trait or whether it can apply to the universe at large. This ties into our last point about Albedo and whether or not statements about human nature could be applied to realians such as Momo.
No, that's not right. You little realians weren't even born from a woman's womb.
Nietzsche's view on the will to power evolved over the course of his lifetime. When he describes it in The Gay Science, he talks about it as purely a human trait, but when he properly named the concept in Thus Spake Zarathustra, he expanded his views to include all living beings. According to his earlier definitions, Albedo denying Momo her human nature would be denying her her will to power, and thus her agency in overcoming her own struggles. Now, obviously Albedo isn't the only character with his own prejudices against realians. Several crew aboard the Woglinde share similar opinions. They're just not the subject of this video. I thought about including a section on Sophie Pathos somewhere in here, as it's the creature created by Albedo to distract the party at the end of Episode 1, but I struggled to find a way to tie Sophia's Gnostic lore to Albedo specifically and was getting very sidetracked. I found she didn't relate particularly well to Albedo, but more to Xenosaga's lore as a whole. Additionally, Gnosticism really is its own abstract beast in comparison to other religions, but if you can come up with anything tying Sophia or Pistis Sophia to Albedo's character, feel free to let me know.